New Republican strategy documents show how the party is trying to rebrand as populist and against some corporations, which leads to this now recurring talk of woke companies, which is drawing some mockery.
Let's just cut to the chase. The big tech platforms are owned and operated by woke capitalists. They're leftists. They're liberals.
There's no way Mark Zuckerberg is woke. At most, he's switched on.
And there are other reasons this supposed clash with some corporations does not add up other than that. As we've reported right here on The Beat, this talk didn't just come out of nowhere. It echoes a very deliberate PR attempt outlined in GOP documents to find ways for Republicans to say they're confronting corporations and representing working class voters. From the attacks on woke companies and big tech to picking a fight with China that emphasizes support for working Americans. Now keep in mind, these are basically telegraphed, strategic Republican moves. It's designed to create the idea that they're clashing with these companies when the Republican Party's support for Wall Street is not really changing on big ticket money items like taxes, labor, regulation. Instead, they are focused on fairly vague ways to kind of play act this fight with corporations. From wokeness, what does that even mean, to China, how do you even address it? It's all become something of a MAGA buzzword salad.
I think corporate America, by trying to genuflect to wokeness, I think they've gone down a really bad road. What about the fact that you're doing business with the Communist Party of China?
There is something about the woke politics inside these companies, the way they think of themselves is not really American companies, and it's somehow very, very difficult for them to have a sharp anti-China edge of any sort.
The last speaker was Trump supporter and tech billionaire Peter Thiel, an early Facebook backer. Also a reminder that not all of Silicon Valley is somehow automatically anti-Trump. As for the GOP memo, it makes the political point that many Americans have a negative view of big tech. So Republicans should focus on what they call egregious suppression of conservative speech. Now, as a matter of policy, if you think about this just big picture, this could be bipartisan. There are liberals who are plenty concerned about Silicon Valley's outsized influence and its impact on speech. But this Republican critique is actually pretty self-interested. It's not about changing the laws or helping the workers at this or other companies. It's really all about whether Republicans get to talk the way they want on all platforms, as the memo puts it, whether there's a concern about suppression of conservative voices.
If we do not push back against Google and Twitter, we will lose our democratic ability to talk to each other.
Big tech should be ashamed of how they're so clearly trying to aid the Joe Biden campaign.
Big tech is trying to silence any voice of dissent.
Let's take an example. Let's say that we think that Facebook is politically biased in favor of the left, which it seems pretty clear at this point they are.
The last guy there is Ben Shapiro. In the last 24 hours, he's got two of the top performing links on Facebook of his political views. He's up there, right behind Fox News, and right ahead of another right-winger, Dan Bongino, suggesting they are doing pretty well on Facebook, even while they play victim. But this is broader than just that micro view. The debates over why Trump's messages, including a call for insurrection, and whether that got him suspended from maybe more than one media platform for good, Twitter forever, Facebook for some time. In fact, they're going to decide tomorrow whether to reinstate Trump's account. But the bigger picture is researchers who looked into the matter actually don't find evidence that there is a top-down anti-conservative crusade here. Indeed, the bigger concern is disinformation. And that brings us to the heart of the question. You look at all this taken together, and you have a party that desperately needs to deal with a pandemic recession and a new president who's giving out stimulus checks and building roads and bridges and finding Republicans support it. How do you rebrand as working class with made-up, fairly professorial arguments about woke companies and things with China that you can't really explain as policy when your big solution is you should be allowed to talk more on Facebook? I want to bring in a very special guest to get into the answers to these questions. And that is our deep dive political conversation, which is always a special day here on The Beat. We call it Che Day with political strategist Che Kumanduri. He worked on 3 presidential campaigns, and this is actually part 2 of a series he's contributed to as we try to understand why we're hearing so much about big tech and woke companies from Republicans. Thanks for coming back, sir.
Thank you, Ari. How are you?
I'm great. What I love about some of the points that you've been exploring here, and I mentioned this as part 2, that it's very easy to immediately get bogged down, whether you're at a dinner party or spending too much time on Twitter, in responding to the one little thing in front of you. Even fact-checking, well, wait, they are popular on Facebook, as we mentioned. But you're arguing there's something much broader going on. What is it?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we need to sort of differentiate GOP opposition to, say, trade with China and Democratic opposition to trade with China. When a person like Sherrod Brown, who is very much protectionist, opposes trade with China, he does so as part of a larger program to keep workers' wages up. You know, it includes pro-unionization efforts, it includes support for universal daycare, et cetera. The whole goal is to help workers keep more of their paycheck and have more security in their jobs. That is not what the GOP does when they oppose trade with China. They oppose foreign trade simply because they oppose foreigners. And the same thing kind of is true with big tech. The whole reason they fight against big tech is because of the deplatforming of Donald Trump. It is because they know that they very much need full access to these platforms to spread lies and disinformation. That is very different from the liberal argument against big tech, which is to try to stop the spreading of lies and misinformation on the internet. It is crucial for the conservative movement that they have access to these platforms. It is a movement that is heavily reliant on scapegoating and conspiracy theories and pushing emotional hot buttons, and nothing does that better than social media and the internet. Look at the rise of Trump.
Yeah, I mean, you just laid that out. Pitch perfect. Makes sense. Because you mentioned the deplatforming, as they put it, or what many of these companies call enforcing safety rules, although I've argued on this program it is tricky, and I don't know about an unreviewable corporate power to do that, although the insurrection would be one of the violent ends where you want to avoid that. But we do have a headline for you, Che. Breaking late today, Donald Trump, after talking about creating a social media platform, instead of doing that or starting an app or a tech company or any such matter, instead he's launched a blog. It's a section of his website that operates like a WordPress blog. And so, Che, I'm not here to make Donald Trump look ridiculous. Today he's done that all by himself. They didn't need to pretend or lie that they were going to create an app or a tech platform. If they put millions into it, that would have been an interesting thing. What does it tell you that he is going straight Blogspot, straight LiveJournal, straight back to 95, baby?
Well, the reality is he couldn't put it together. He didn't have the access to the kind of engineers and venture capital, quite frankly. Perhaps his friend Peter Thiel refused to help him out in that regard. He could easily have helped him out in terms of putting that together, but he couldn't put it together. Really, what this shows you is how much Donald Trump needed the platform of Twitter, how much the conservative movement needs access to Facebook to really push their message. Without Twitter, as Franklin Foer, the writer for The Atlantic, said, Donald Trump started out as Cecil the Lion and he ended up as president of the United States. That was entirely the result of Twitter. It is something that he learned, quite frankly, when he did the birther conspiracy. And he was able to use Twitter to move that conspiracy theory and get the media to cover it. Now, nobody covers almost anything he has to say. And that will basically be true of this blog that he's putting out. It's just going to be another blog on the internet, uncovered by everybody except for a few people on the right-wing media. It's really very sad and pathetic, but that's kind of where Trump has ended up. He's just ended up as just another blogger on the internet, not the most powerful man in what was once the most powerful part of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you lay it out, and it's striking. I know you flagged something that Pat Buchanan used to talk about. Let's take a look at that.
It's a campaign for the working men and women of this country whose interests are being ignored and whose jobs are being sold out in these trade deals done for the benefit of corporations that don't give a hoot about the United States of America or American workers.
The migration of ideas is always fascinating to chart. and some endure for different reasons. Some are labeled extreme and then become not only mainstream, but required. You argue that Pat Buchanan was Donald Trump's forefather, for better or worse.
Correct. I mean, he really created this formulation of Fortress America. And he really discovered that if you combine protectionism against foreign trade, anti-immigration rhetoric, nativism, it would be acceptable to a broad a group of Republicans, mainly because while it might seem hypocritical that on one hand you favor tax cuts for the rich and deregulation for corporations, and on the other hand you're in favor of protectionism, keep in mind that 7 out of 10 CEOs are white males. 70% of factory workers are white, the majority of whom are male. What you are doing is you're creating a white male protection racket. Basically, for corporations, you're agreeing not to regulate them. You're giving their white male CEOs tax cuts. For the predominantly white male factory workers, you're offering to protect their jobs against foreign trade. You're also offering to give them mental comfort against the sight of brown people in their neighborhoods. You're also providing protection against the political claims of women and minorities. All of this goes to a white identity element that Pat Buchanan was really at the forefront of creating. However, the thing that Buchanan did not have, that Donald Trump did have, was social media. If Buchanan had had access to the tools of social media the way Trump had, perhaps history would have been different 20 years ago. It was Donald Trump, however, who used these same tools to rise.